Welcome everyone to our Food versus Forest webinar by Farley & Mitchell. My name is Michael Mitchell. I'm the Managing Director of Farley & Mitchell. There's a lot of interest in this very important area and regulation, which has just been introduced by the EU in June of this year and will take effect over the next 18 to 24 months. It's known as the European Union Regulation on Deforestation-Free Products, or EUDR. This is part of the wider EU Green Deal and represents another regulatory step to reduce deforestation and degradation and ensure also, importantly, long-term sustainability and environmental practices in food and agriculture. In this webinar, we wish to answer three important questions. One is, what does this regulation mean for European and global food and agribusiness? What will the impact be on industry value chains? And we'll have an example from Ghana. And also, how can digitalization play a role in the implementation and compliance of the regulation? I also want to introduce our speakers. I'm delighted that we have three excellent speakers here with us today that will help us to illuminate on the topic and answer these questions. First is my colleague, Dr. Michelle Riblet, who is the Director at Farley & Mitchell and heads our Global Food Systems team. Michelle and our team works in the policy and regulation area in terms of development, implementation and implications across the food system. Michelle will provide an in-depth overview of the EU's Deforestation Regulation, EUDR, and including its origins, objectives, implications and impact for industries and countries. We also have two excellent guest speakers, Michael Ekow Amoah. Michael is Deputy Director of Research and Development at the Ghana Cocoa Board. Ghana is the second largest producer of cocoa in the world, producing 20% of the world's cocoa. It also represents 15% of the country's GDP, and also in relation to value output, it is a value of $2.5 billion in terms of exports, annual exports. So Michael has extensive experience in relation to the regulation and also the policy and sustainability areas of cocoa production and forestry generally, and he will bring his insights in relation to that area. The Cocoa Board itself is responsible for the production, supply and internal market regulation of cocoa, also coffee and indeed shea nuts as well. In Michael's presentation, he will talk about implementing the EU's deforestation regulation, their experience at the Cocoa Board and how they're managing to support farmers in this regard and ensure that production isn't hindered or indeed important exports. Also delighted to welcome Andreas Cerdan. Andreas is a director at Demetra, which is a global ag tech company and a digital platform. And also Andreas has experience and background within the pharma sector, also med tech, and of course ag tech in more recent years. Demetra is a company that uses blockchain technology in terms of its digital solutions, supporting farmers and stakeholders right across the value chain in terms of compliance certification for food companies, traders, farmers, and also agricultural operators. And Andreas will talk about how digitalization can support compliance with the regulation in his presentation. So at this stage, we'll hand over to you, Michelle, and maybe you would start your presentation and provide an outline of the EUDR regulation and its implications across the food system. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Malachy, and welcome to everybody on the webinar. So I'll just share my screen, and as Malachy said, I will go through the regulation on deforestation, the EU regulation, and what that means. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so The next, I suppose, 10 minutes will cover the regulation itself, the broad aims of the regulation and its implications really for you as an operator or a regulator, indeed, either. So as Malachy mentioned earlier on, the regulation was introduced earlier this year. So it's known as Regulation 2023-1115. And the aim of this regulation is to reduce global deforestation and forest degradation. So we know that from the data, there's a huge, I suppose, link with both EU consumption of specific products linked to deforestation and caused by both the forestry industry and the agricultural industry. So this legislation, which is falling as, I suppose, another very important initiative under the Green Deal, this aims to really reduce that and also to give, I suppose, the European customers in particular knowledge that products, particularly the 7 categories of products that that's listed in this legislation, that they will be coming from sustainable supply chains and that the consumption of those will be sustainably produced. So in terms of implementation of the legislation, while it's been introduced in June of this year, there is, I suppose, up until December 2024 for larger enterprises will have to comply by the state, and then a little bit more time in terms of implementation from both the micro and the small enterprises. So that's not until June 2025. So the main goal is to reduce global deforestation by ensuring that products traded into the EU or those types similar products exported from the EU are produced in a sustainable way. And therefore, businesses will have to adapt their supply chain to comply with the new requirements if they wish to continue to trade into a very, I suppose, important and lucrative market for them, which is the EU market. So in terms of why, and what's I suppose the data telling us in terms of the implications of what we've seen today and what has been done in terms of deforestation linked with the consumption of these particular sectors or products from these sectors. So we know that EU consumption of specific goods, which are listed in this legislation, are considerable drivers of deforestation. Both deforestation and forest degradation are important drivers of climate change and biodiversity loss, which are 2 key environmental challenges of our time. So this really is, I suppose, the biggest reason why the Commission wants to address, while a lot of initiatives are happening at the country level in terms of where that deforestation is taking place, the Commission wished to address this through giving, I suppose, this legislative approach to those products that are coming in and being sold in the EU market. So we know from the FAO that approximately 420 million hectares of forests were lost to deforestation over a 30-year period. And this is, I suppose, a huge net area loss, sometimes some areas equivalent to triple the size of France. So we know there's a lot has been done in terms of damage, and I suppose this is really the initiative being to reduce that and I suppose ensure that products being imported are not linked to any deforestation linked back to December 2020. So by promoting the consumption of deforestation-free products and reducing the EU's impact on global forests, this legislation intends to bring down greenhouse gas emissions, which are resulting from deforestation, and then assist in that very important fight against global biodiversity loss. So let's talk, I suppose, about those 7 key commodities that are really important and are considered those very high-risk products that have been associated with significant environmental and social impacts and that are in particular called out on this in this legislation. So they are coffee, cocoa, cattle, soya, palm oil, timber, and rubber. So these products, or any derivative products from these categories, such as chocolate, leather, beef, etc., they will really need to have very solid traceability systems and verification of true due diligence statements to say that they're not linked with deforestation. So this is really, I suppose, a lot of new requirements for traders and operators, and it does apply to those operators or traders that are placing these types of products and bringing them into the EU market. So in terms of the legislation and in particular its requirements, firstly, I suppose broadly, there's a prohibition on any products coming into the EU which are linked with deforestation. So in order to, I suppose, prove that your products which you wish to place on the EU market are not linked with deforestation, you need to have a very solid due diligence statement, which is a statement that you make as an operator or trader and declaring that these products have negligible risk of being linked with deforestation. So this is a significant piece of the legislation. And then in order to achieve this due diligence statement, businesses will need to have risk assessment mechanisms in place and risk mitigation planning in place. In terms of risk assessment mechanisms, we know that the Commission are categorizing countries on a three-tier, using a three-tier approach. So they will categorize countries as being of low risk, of medium or standard risk, and of being of high risk country. So each country will be categorized under one of these categories. At the moment, there is a process under a benchmarking process underway in which the Commission will then assign those risk categorizations to the countries, and that will be completed by December 2024. But for the moment, all countries are categorized as standard risk. In terms of risk mitigation planning, policies, documented policies and procedures need to be put in place within organizations to ensure that there is a process of looking at risk and mitigating against risk and against links with deforestation. Also, additional needs in terms of resources, in particular compliance officers, to verify that these systems are being implemented and are correct and are effective in assessing risk, and also a function to have an audit function within or available to the organizations as well. So these, I suppose, are the requirements which will cost money, which will cost additional resources, and will have that additional either direct or indirect costs to the businesses. Penalties are also laid out in the legislation, of course, in order to drive compliance, and they cover both fines, exclusions, prohibitions, and confiscations. So if we look, I suppose, broadly at the 6 key categories in terms of trade and supply into the EU, we know that there are specific countries which are really going to be impacted and are, I suppose, at risk due to the level of products that they're producing or placing on the market from these countries. And also, I suppose, due to the fact that they've been already linked with deforestation. So if we look at cocoa, countries like West Africa, in particular Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana and Cameroon being associated and needing to have these systems in place. And Michael will talk to us a little bit more about this particular sector then from the Ghana perspective, which was very interesting to hear. In terms of palm oil, high producing countries exporting directly into this market are Indonesia and Malaysia. Coffee coming from Brazil and Vietnam, soya as well coming from that part of the world, Brazil and the United States. Beef, similar regions, Argentina and Brazil. and then rubber, Indonesia and Cote d'Ivoire. So we see, I suppose, from the global trade of these types of products into the EU, and existing deforestation problems in these regions, then these will be the regions which will be likely to be impacted. So I suppose the purpose of the webinar today is to talk about and bring together some of the key stakeholders in order to achieve compliance with the regulation. So obviously the regulation is an additional piece, I suppose, introduces additional requirements for businesses, for traders, for operators, but it can be, I suppose, seen as also future-proofing the businesses in terms of standing over sustainability, standing over traceability, and really being able to help businesses in these particular chains look to strengthening their the sustainability within their supply chains. So in particular, the regulators, so obviously I'm talking here now from the regulatory point of view, from the policy and legislation that is now in place at EU level and what needs to be complied with, but also from the individual farmers or operators or traders' point of view. And Michael will talk to us about this perspective from that point of view. How do we achieve compliance, and what sort of engagement or collaboration is needed from the farmer level, or as a national approach, what needs to be done in order to, I suppose, support all of these actors within the chain achieve compliance. And then in particular, technology providers. So we'll see later from Andreas the real need for digitalization, in particular for the mapping of farms and plots of farms, is really going to be driven, compliance is going to be driven through digitalization. So really what we bring today is to talk about the need for trusted technology providers to then support the development of internal team competencies and to drive the, I suppose, the competency piece within the organizations, and then the need for that collaborative approach to achieving compliance. So cocoa is one of those commodities which is listed in the legislation, very important in terms of its consumption in the EU. So the EU consumers are the world's largest consumers, and we certainly import the largest volume of cocoa in the world. So we import 60% of the world's cocoa here in Europe. And main producers supplying into Europe that volume of cocoa are Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire and Cameroon. So we can see the value there, 4.6 billion euros. And that's the market value of the cocoa coming in from these three particular regions into the EU. So very valuable commodity, very important for consumers, and a very important in terms of the sustainability and traceability that's needed for this particular sector now that are due to the EUDR. So if we look at Ghana in particular, we will talk to Michael in a few minutes. As I finish up here in the next slide, we'll talk to him about, I suppose, the experience from this particular point of view, from the farmer's perspective. So how, in particular, cocoa sector in Ghana is preparing for the implementation of the new legislation. What are the key impacts of the regulation for the farmers on the ground? And what can other sectors learn from the approach that Ghana has taken? So I'll finish there, and I'll hand back to Malachy before we move to Michael. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It's clear the regulation will definitely have far-reaching implications right across the globe in terms of the major food and agricultural production regions. Also, it crosses both edible and non-food commodities, and of course all the downstream sectors. So it'll be interesting, Michael, to get from you how the Ghana Cocoa Board have been preparing for this regulation. Michelle mentioned that 50% of Ghana's cocoa is exported to the EU, so it's obviously a major market for Ghana and for so many other countries and commodities. So it'd be great to get your insights in relation to that. Can I just maybe also mention that I understand some people have been having issues on LinkedIn in terms of picking up the audio. Apologies for anyone that has experienced that. But I can assure you that at the very end of the webinar, we will be putting the webinar up on our site and circulating the relevant link for anyone to log in. So, Michael, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for our audience for the time to listen to us. My task is to tell you the story of Ghana, how Ghana has been preparing for the EUDR, for the implementation of the EUDR. Next slide. So in order to understand the approach Ghana has adopted, we need to have a view of how Ghana cocoa is structured. Ghana cocoa is produced by smallholder farmers. About 90% of the producers are smallholders, and they hold a farm size of less than 5 hectares. The average one is 1.7 hectare per farmer. But Ghana cocoa sector is well regulated, and there's a law that guides the regulation. It's called the Ghana Cocoa Board Law, or the Cocoa Board Law, PNDC Law 81. And it forms the basis for the establishment of Ghana Cocoa Board and gives Cocoa Board 2 major mandates. The first mandate is to facilitate, encourage, and promote cocoa production, marketing, and processing. The second mandate is to purchase, the only agency that purchases cocoa from farmers and sell the cocoa to processors. So the burden of sale is on Cocoa Board in Ghana, but not on farmers. And we know, as we heard from Mitchell, that the EUDR gives some traceability requirements on smallholder farmers. But in the case of Ghana, because of the peculiarity of it, because it's regulated, and because the burden of sale is on Cocoa Board, the requirement now becomes the burden of Cocoa Board to support the farmer to be able to meet them. So Cocoa Board decided, next slide, Cocoa Board decided to look around for existing tools. We'll first look at some of the implications of the EUDR and the burden it places, or the requirement that it places on the smallholder farmer, and i.e. Cocoa Board. First of all, the farmer needs to collect data on geolocations of the plots that produce the cocoa beans. And to do that, the farmer needs a traceability system that will link the produce to the plot of land. The farmer needs to do risk assessment to be able to give evidence that the cocoa is not produced from a land that was involved in deforestation, and also to meet the legal aspect of the EUDR, that is, child labor was not involved in the production of the beans. Here again, the farmer needs to provide evidence to prove that the cocoa was produced legally. In other words, human rights were respected and environmental rights were respected. In our country, it is illegal for you to produce within a restricted forest. So we need to provide evidence that that law has been respected. The farmer needs to put in mitigation measures if any risks are found to be above negligible level. So in doing all this, it requires resources, huge resources to be able to do that. So it puts a big burden on the farmer, smallholder farmer, and for that matter, Cocoa Board, which is supporting the smallholder farmer in this direction. Next slide. So with that burden, Cocoa Board decided to look around if there are any existing structure that it can take advantage of. Indeed, there were existing traceability systems by the private sector. But unfortunately, the system doesn't cover all cocoa farms. And that makes it difficult for us to give the evidence that is required by EUDR. So Cocoa Board decided to adopt a national approach and have national systems that will make it possible for Ghana cocoa to be compliant. And in doing that, we're looking at ensuring that the country is competitive in the sense that it has all the requirements that it needs to meet the EUDR, and at the same time to reduce compliance costs. Because if you have so many private systems running, you have a lot of duplications and the cost of compliance may be high. Way back in 2016, Ghana Cocoa Board decided to come out with a data system that will bring visibility in the cocoa industry. So we saw this was an opportunity for us to develop the traceability system on, because with that database, we had already taken, measured the cocoa farms, all the polygons, and I've already registered all farmers and linked them to the polygons. So we decided to have a national cocoa traceability system that will serve as a single source of truth for every actor in the cocoa industry. In other words, we are ready to provide service to the operator and trader who places product on the EU market. So the system is said that each parcel of cocoa sold by Cocoa Board will go with all the mandating data requirements as stated in Article 9 of the EUDR. And this will enable the operator and trader, in our case, the first buyer, to complete the due diligence statement, because all the information are attached to the parcel of cocoa that is sold to the operator or the first buyer. Next slide. So what is the Ghana Cocoa Traceability System? Before Cocoa decided to develop the Ghana Cocoa Traceability System, we already had some traceability system in place. It was manual through our grading system. Through our grading system, which is done at the district level. At the district level, the marks that are fixed, the seal that is fixed to a graded and sealed cocoa, but the drop mass will enable you to trace the cocoa to the district, but not to the plot of land. So there was a gap there, you couldn't trace the plot of land. And secondly, it was manual, so it was laborious. So Cocoa Board decided to come up with the Ghana Cocoa Traceability System by extending the traceability system to the plot of land, and also digitizing the manual system from the district to the port of shipment, under the guiding principle of tracing one step backwards and tracking one step forward. So the farmer can trace to the plot of land and track to the purchasing clerk. Purchasing clerk can trace to the farmer and track to the district depot. It goes on until it gets to the port of shipment. So the electronic system was developed, and as we speak now, we have a first mile traceability system in place and ready for EUDR. Next slide. So how is the Ghana Cocoa Traceability System addressing the EUDR? If you look at the EUDR, there are three key elements. First of all, the geolocations. The geolocations of the plot of land have all been captured by the Ghana Cocoa Traceability System. And the system is said that each parcel of cocoa would indicate the geolocation of the plot that produced that parcel of cocoa. So that aspect has been fulfilled. Then, if we look at the other requirement, which is a deforestation-free cocoa, as defined by the FAO, the system has a cocoa-related deforestation risk assessment model anchored on it, said that each parcel of cocoa, you can determine which one is deforestation-free and which one is not deforestation-free, because the risk assessment has been done and segregation has also been done. The third thing had to do with legality of the produce. And in our case, Ghana has ratified ILO conventions. So child labor human rights is a big issue here. The model has a child labor assessment and deforestation assessment model that ensures that only cocoa that were produced without child labor, that were produced by respecting human rights, is sold to the EU market. And also the fact that the risk assessment will also track whether the cocoa was produced in a restricted forest. In Ghana, there's a law that bans the production of cocoa in production of any commodity in a restricted forest. So that is our law. We must give evidence that we respect that law. And that system will enable us to give evidence to show that we have respected the law. Next slide. Where are we now? As I said, we have already captured all the geolocation of cocoa farms. So far, we have captured 791,000 farmers, covering about 1.4 hectares of cocoa farmlands, involving about 1.2 million cocoa farms. So as I said, the average farm size is about 1.7. We have also developed the traceability software and populated it. So as we speak, we have established first mile traceability. The next stage is operationalizing traceability, which currently, as we speak, we are in New Adibiase, that's one of the districts of cocoa, Asimfosu, and Asibreku. These are 3 districts, cocoa districts in Ghana. We are currently there doing sensitization and training people to be able to use the systems. Pretty soon, we'll be having cocoa, traceable cocoa coming from these districts. Our approach is to do it in phases. We'll do the continuous learning approach. As when we move from one district to another, then we learn, then we scale up. We have 70 cocoa districts. We expect that by March 2024, we would have covered all the cocoa districts, 70 cocoa districts in Ghana. And I must say, this has been a very expensive venture. It is costing us not less than 100 million euros to be able to put these systems in place. So in a nutshell, that is the story of Ghana. That's how far Ghana has gone in terms of preparing for the EUDR. And I believe it's akin to most producing countries where it is dominated by smallholder farmers. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. That's been extremely insightful. And as you said, a lot of these base commodities are coming from countries such as Ghana, where essentially they're produced by smallholder farmers. I think what was quite interesting, you mentioned about the interplay or the interaction between processes, people, and protocols. And essentially that makes up the systemization or perhaps the digitalization, which I think, Andreas, you should be able to provide some insight and context for us on the experience of Dimitra in relation to this. So we're looking forward to your presentation.
Yes, thank you, Malachy. Thank you, Michael and Michelle. Wow, that was just a great insight from you, Michael. It's remarkable how far you've taken this already in your steps toward digitalization of your whole industry there. And if I understood correctly, you've started this in 2016, so that's when the strategy was prepared, and you raised funds and you started implementing in 2019. So over the last 4 years, you've been working on getting your industry ready, which is a lot of work and a lot of investment. As we heard, 100 million euros, that's a lot of investment. The good news is there are now technology providers like Dimitra, like us, that can support you in your digitalization strategy and provide the software tools that Michael was just mentioning and services you need, be it at origin or as a trader, producer, or retailer. So, and unfortunately, we don't have 4 years to get ready. So that's what I want to talk about in the next 10 minutes. Not necessarily too much about technology, which I'm happy to dive into with interested parties individually, but I want to talk about what does it actually mean to comply with EUDR, and is it maybe an opportunity rather than just a disruption? Well, it is a disruption, we know that, but it is here to stay and we have to deal with it. So we like to look at it as an opportunity to drive our digitalization efforts into the origins, our clients' digitalization efforts into their own supply chains, and so on. So if we look at a use case that we have in coffee, the requirements are to source not only from one origin, but from 26 origins. So if we look at that, we had one client that is sourcing from 30,000 smallholder farmers. Those are located in 26 different origins. And that means we have to capture those origins, we have to capture those smallholder farms, and we have to provide a deforestation analysis. And all this needs to be done within the next 3 months. Now, why within the next 3 months? You might say EUDR doesn't come to pass until 2025. Yes. However, our team has been speaking to major EU retailers, and they will add their compliance clauses or EUDR compliance clauses by the beginning of Q2 of 2024. So you will be facing questions, requests for compliance from different parties in the chain. So let's look at how we can get there. Again, you don't have to take 4 years and 100 million euros. You have third-party teams that can support you. So the steps to do this, in this particular case, we imported 30,000 single GPS locations. We automated the mapping and analysis of those locations to provide the verifiable evidence that EUDR is calling for. We supported the risk assessment and can support in the risk mitigation. And the strategy for this is, and this is where I believe a lot of decisions need to be made fairly quickly from the stakeholders in the chains. The first decision that needs to be made is obviously on the external team that you invite into your strategy process. Not only technology, but most importantly, a team that can provide you the support to integrate and collaborate with the origins. To do exactly what Michael just mentioned, provide a solution so that the smallholder farmers or other stakeholders in the origins can capture the data that is needed, can capture the GPS locations, the polygons for larger scale operations, larger than 4 hectares. However, you are strongly encouraged to also look at your internal team and make sure that you provide the resources, the human resources to create experts in your own team. Because if we're looking at EUDR as a digitalization driver, and my tagline here is from disruption to opportunity, we, again, have a strategy to look for the right technology, to collect, retain, and share data, do the strategy, expand it to an external team, make sure that we have an internal team that can retain the strategy and build upon it in the company. When it comes to implementation, of course, we need human resources to do that in the existing digital infrastructure from a service provider side like Dimitra, or at the origins. And this is where it gets tricky. Michael was describing of their origin being ready for this. So you have a partner in Ghana, Cocoa Board, that will be able to provide you a lot of data in the form that you need it, or even pre-certified data. However, other origins might not be that far ahead with digitalization. So we need to adapt our strategy to different settings and different levels of digitalization. Now, what is the digital opportunity that comes from this? When it comes from the technology side, if you think of expanding your digital reach into your supply chain, you will improve the market readiness for new markets. And we've heard Michael briefly talk about CO2 markets that are very important to offset some of the cost of digitalization, and future regulation readiness and automation is also a big driver for that. So looking at technology, it will provide the opportunity to be more prepared for the future markets, be more prepared for future regulations, and be more prepared internally to prepare analyses based on the data that you collect, make decisions on the data, based on the data that you collect. Make real-time communication possible with your with your origins. And when it comes to your internal team, this whole process ideally strengthens your internal digital and data expertise to come up with new and take advantage of new opportunities when it comes to data and data markets. The implementation, therefore, optimizes and controls your own digital infrastructure. Maybe the ERP system that you and or your supply chain is using is not ideal. There needs to be an upgrade. Those are things that will come out in the strategy and will be provided and improved within your own infrastructure. The real-time communication with the origins is one of the key aspects that we find important because at Dimitra, we know adaptation of technology is the key in this. So same as having an external team that supports you in the strategy, you need to not convince the smallholder farmers to collect data. Convincing is very difficult. You need to provide them with a value or a value added application that they will use indefinitely. So what we try to do is always simplify our technology to simplify technology adoption, to give them a value, to improve access for the smallholder farmer to education so that we, again, provide a value to them. In the way we do it is in remote sensing, in our agronomists providing knowledge through satellite image recognition and analysis, training our own software to automate this. And this, of course, prepared us well, this work with satellite image data, to create a module that can now automate the analysis of deforestation for EUDR. So we do detect forest loss and new forest coverage. We provide a verifiable evidence in terms of a heat map comparison. And again, here we compare the last image of 2020 and the last image of today to determine if and when there was deforestation. We also detect compliance with local agricultural regulations and record all this to the blockchain. Our system is blockchain enabled, but not necessarily, so blockchain is not a must. However, we do encourage our clients to use the cutting edge technology that provides not only safe transfer of data, but has other upsides that reach far beyond transfer of data. We're happy to support you and your clients in about 70 countries, so globally. And again here, why am I mentioning this? Because we are looking at, especially when it comes to implementation, a very diverse and complex process depending on the origin that needs local support and which we can also provide. Happy to have worked with big organizations around the globe, both from the agricultural sector as well as the government sector and NGO sector. And we're happy to answer all your questions in a one-on-one if needed. I know we have a few minutes now to ask some questions, so I'll be handing over back to Maliki to convene with that part of the webinar. Thank you so much, and yeah, here we go.
Andreas, thank you very much. That was also very insightful, and I think it goes to show the role and the support that digitalization can provide, and I think how necessary it is. Michael talked about earlier, I think over 1 million smallholder farmers and how all the complexity that goes with that in terms of where they're located and the scale of each individual and so forth. And I suppose that kind of brings you a question we have here in relation to cost, Michael. You know, you mentioned $100 million, and that was a budget. And I suppose the question that would arise from that is, what are the sources, or how did Ghana Cocoa Board fund the initiative, and so far the preparatory work, or the preparation work in relation to getting ready for the regulation?
Thank you, Malachi. We, as I said, it was conceived in 2016. We didn't have the resources until 2019, when we had a facility from AFDB, African Development Bank. We got a $10 million facility to start the basic database, that is taking the GPS location of the farms and linking it to the farmers, and also having the software developed by a vendor. That was the only thing that $10 million could do. After that, once we established traceability, the next thing is to operationalize it. That requires some money in sensitization. You must do segregation. It is change management. You must train people to use the system, to understand the system, to appreciate the system. That is going to cost us a lot of money. You must put in tagging system, QR code system. We are using QR code system, tagging system. That is costing a lot of money. And that one, management has raised some money for us to start. It's part of the reason why we are doing piecemeal approach. Because if we are to do all, we can't get all the resources to do all at the go. So we do as and when we get the money, then keep expanding and hope that by March 2024, we'll cover. If we have to get the entire 90 million euros left, we would have finished within 2 or 3 months to get ready for EUDR. So funding has been a big issue. So I'm sure other developing producing countries will start thinking about how to raise money, because it's a very expensive venture. Thank you.
I take it the World Bank obviously plays a role in relation to that, and the African Development Bank and so forth, and there are various applications that need to be made to provide that support. Thank you, Michael. Michelle, maybe a question for you in relation to the risk assessment, and can you explain a little bit more about the steps, some of the steps, and how certification seems to fit into all of this?
Yeah, sure, Malachy. So I suppose risk assessment, as we've heard, risk assessment and risk mitigation, they're key pieces, and they will feed into the due diligence statements which are needed then for accompanying the consignment at the point of import. Risk assessment itself, if we look at that, you know, we have, I suppose, 2 ways to look at it. We have it at a country level, where the Commission will be assigning risk country profiling of the risks for each of the countries. So that will be set. It's a benchmark exercise. It is dynamic, so it's important for everyone to keep an eye on that list. And obviously, if you're importing from a higher risk countries, the frequencies of testing at the import is much higher. So that's the first point. And then moving down to the country level, at an operational level, risk assessment will need, I suppose, huge amounts of data, some of those being related to could be supplied through digitalization from the geo locations of farms, linking those to knowledge about the level of forestation, of forests in the country, deforestation, all the risks that are maybe within that region, to do with fraud, to do with labour, to do with rights of indigenous people, etc. So there's a huge wealth of information that's needed to support the risk assessment. And yeah, absolutely, the certification schemes are really important, and they will help. The regulation does provide for the certification schemes. It is important to understand that there's a need for those certification schemes to be credible and robust schemes. But they certainly can play a part in supporting the businesses comply and support them in their risk assessment. It's important to say as well, just finally, I suppose, in relation to the certification schemes, not all certification schemes will cover everything. So you need to know what your scheme is covering. They might partially cover the requirements of the regulation, and you can use them for that. But you have to be aware that you'd have to also then have other ways to show that the risk is assessed for those other pieces that it may not cover. So yes, definitely there is a role for them. It's absolutely needed that they're taken into account, but just be aware of what they cover and be sure that they're credible. I was the advice really.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Kind of focus it back on process, Andreas. From your experience, which is the most challenging? Is it the partners or the technology?
Well, that's a great question, Malachy. Thanks. And we heard from Michael that, of course, the challenge to create technology and to create it from scratch is quite a big one and quite an expensive one. That's why at this late stage of creating a strategy, I would strongly suggest for everybody that is looking for the right solution provider to not only look at technology, because yes, that is one part, but look at the human aspect behind it. What does that mean? When it comes to technology, we also need agronomist expertise in the background of that technology. So if you're considering different technology providers, make sure you have a provider that has also an agricultural background and agricultural experts in the background to train those systems. But more importantly, look at a provider that can provide you with a local team and that has expertise in the origins to work with the origins and the smallholder farmers in the origins. Because again, Michael presented his project over the last 4 years. They've gotten the smallholder farmers ready to provide this data, to participate. And he knows how difficult that is, even if you are part of the community. So that is a very important fact to achieve what needs to be achieved in such a short amount of time that we have. Providers or origins prepared like Ghana and the cocoa industry through Michael and his team is fairly rare. There are origins that have also taken steps, but you will come across areas that need to start from scratch, and that's important to look at the human expertise of the provider that you're working with.
Yeah, thank you, Andreas. I think that's actually very important. So at this stage, we're really coming to the end of our webinar. Just again to remind everyone that the webinar will be put up on our website straight after this event, and it can be viewed, and we'll also circulate the link. Please feel free to reach out directly to Andreas at Dimitra, or indeed Michelle at Farley Mitchell in relation to interpreting the application or the compliance in relation to this regulation, of course, anything in relation to the due diligence area as well for support. I want to take the opportunity to thank my colleague, Dr. Michelle Riblet, for organising this webinar and coordinating it, and also for our guest speakers from Michael Amoah from the Cocoa Board, from Andreas Cerdan from Dimitra. Thank you both also for joining us. I think it's been a very worthwhile and insightful webinar. I hope everyone who has taken the opportunity to tune in now or in the future has also found that to be the case as well. And finally, thank you to our colleagues at marketing, Morgan and Nathan, for their support in the background all the time. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for your time. Bye-bye.